You might have been seeing many news articles running all around saying that rupee's value is at its all-time low. Yes, the rupee value has hit nearly 78 rupees per dollar and it is not looking good for our currency. So in this video, we'll see why US dollar is so important in the first place, and we'll see why the Indian rupee is always compared to the US dollar, the advantages of rupee's value falling, and even the obvious disadvantages of that happening. This is Market Feed. Let's get started. Let's talk about the story of the US dollar. Till 1944, most countries around the world used to value their currency according to the gold reserves they had. So after World War II, many countries saw themselves holding a lot less gold and having to print a lot of currency because they were financially bankrupt. So you know what happens when you print a lot of currency. All, or if not most of the global countries, including the European ones, went into hyperinflation, where they saw prices of essential goods shooting up because of the high number of currency notes in the system. And in 1944, at the Bretton Woods conference, the US came up with a brilliant idea to solve all of Europe's problems. They said, we hold nearly 75% of the whole world's gold reserve. So you let us print dollars according to this gold reserve. So the dollar will be linked or pegged to the gold that the US is holding, and every other country in this Bretton Woods conference, nearly 44 countries, peg or value your currency to the US dollar according to a fixed exchange rate. And the US was having a very good time. All 44 countries agreed to the US's demands, and everyone pegged their currency's value against the US dollar, and the US dollar in turn was pegged against gold at around $35 per ounce. The Bretton Woods Conference also saw the establishment of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which both use the dollar to transact for all their needs. And the US was having a really good time till 1973. Nearly 30 years, the US dollar was the most prominent currency in the whole world because of this deal at the Bretton Woods Conference. But in 1973, something really important happened. The US, who was following an inflationary monetary policy, that means to grow their economy, they were continuing to print dollar notes. At some point of time, they understood that they do not have enough gold backing all the dollars that they had printed, and the Bretton Woods Agreement was cancelled one fine day by President Richard Nixon in 1973. So by then, the US currency was called as a fiat currency. That means gold was not backing this currency. Instead, the US government itself was backing it. But then still, it kept on losing importance, and the US economists feared that the US dollar would keep on losing its importance. They were searching for ways to solve this problem. That's when in 1974, Richard Nixon flew down to Saudi Arabia and struck a deal with the country. The country was one of the major suppliers of crude oil around the world, and the US agreed that, or the US made an agreement with the country that they will help the Saudis defend themselves against the Israelis. They will give them protection for all the oil fields, but in turn, all crude oil transactions from there on towards the end have to be carried out in US dollars. And thereby the US petrodollar was formed. That means any dollar which is used in the transaction of crude oil was thereby known as a petrodollar. And soon after that, the US signed a similar agreement with all 14 countries in the OPEC, that is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. This is how the US dollar became the prominent currency throughout the world, and this is why even today the Indian currency is compared majorly against the US dollar. So now that we have talked about the US dollar's history, I hope you have an idea why the US dollar is the world's favorite currency and why the Indian rupee is always majorly compared to the US dollar. Now let's talk about why the rupee fluctuates in the first place. Why does the rupee value move up and down, and why is it losing so much value right now? As a stock market participant, you probably know that any movement in the market is caused by demand and supply, and there is no change here. Every factor involving forex exchange rates are majorly contributed or majorly affected by demand and supply. So now there are many other factors which can affect this demand and supply. It is not just retailers playing with the currency, buying and selling. No, it is big factors, economic conditions, economic decisions, RBIs, and even the US Federal Reserve policies that can affect the exchange rate between the US dollar and the Indian rupee. So why is the Indian rupee losing its value compared to the US dollar now? So I'll tell you something really interesting here. Just open the chart of USD INR for the last many years, for maybe the past 20 years. You can see that the Indian rupee is constantly losing its value against the US dollar. But the major factor that is affecting rupee's valuation currently is the increase in crude oil prices. If you want to look at the US Brent or the Brent oil crude prices here, and if you want to look at the rupee's fall here, you can see that it has happened at a similar time frame. So in early 2022, the prices of crude oil in the international markets started shooting up because of factors including the Russia-Ukraine war. And India, being a huge importer of crude oil, they wherever the prices of crude oil were shooting up, our demand stayed the same. So we had to keep on importing crude oil at higher and higher prices. So at the end, India was spending more dollars per barrel of crude oil because the international prices were shooting up. So because we are required to spend more dollars to get this crude oil, the private companies or the government itself has to go to the RBI. They have to sell their Indian rupees and they have to buy US dollar. So can you see what is happening here? There is huge supply of Indian rupees and there is higher demand for the US dollar. If you are a stock market participant, you can easily guess what is going to happen here. Yes, the value of the US dollar increases because there is higher demand, and the value of the Indian rupee falls because there is a lot of supply in the market. So as this was happening, foreign institutional investors were also selling heavily in our markets. In the last 13 months, foreign institutional investors have sold more than 3.5 lakh crore rupees worth of stocks in the Indian markets. And what do they do with all these rupees? Do they hold it just in their Indian accounts? No, they take it back home. They convert it once again to the US dollar. They take it back home. And what is happening here once again? There is higher demand for the dollar and there is a lot of supply for the rupee. And once again, the value of rupee falls. So now that we know why the Indian rupee is compared to the US dollar and why the Indian rupee keeps on moving compared to the US dollar, let us try to understand whether this is good or bad for our country. So let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of having a weaker rupee like we are having right now. So the first major advantage is that anyone who wants to invest into India from a foreign country, now that the rupee's value is lower, for the same amount of dollars, dirhams, any foreign currency they are putting into the country, they'll be getting more rupees. They can make larger investments in our country. So foreign investments in our country has been predicted to rise whenever the rupee value falls. Companies which export goods and services from India to other global nations, they will be getting more profits in rupees, and that is really good for them. And any NRI, any Indian working outside of India, imagine they want to send money to their family members in India, they can send more money, right? Imagine if someone is working in Dubai, earlier the value of dirham was around 18-19 rupees, now it is at near 21 rupees. So for the same salary he is earning in Dubai, he can send more money to his family members in India. Now let's get to the disadvantages. The first major disadvantage is India is a net importer of goods. That means we import a lot of goods and we have to end up spending more. Imports become more expensive when the value of the Indian rupee falls, and this causes what? Comes to our second disadvantage, inflation. In fact, this happened during Indira Gandhi's time as well. When she willingly devalued our Indian currency, there were massive protests throughout the country because of the huge inflationary pressures that shook the country. So talking about another major disadvantage, our government, just like any other major government across the world, has many foreign loans to our name. So when we're trying to pay back these foreign loans, they'll mostly be in US dollars or whichever currency we have taken it from. And when we're trying to pay all these loans back, now we'll have to pay a higher amount just because the value of rupee has fallen. Now let's get to the last part of the video. Indians especially do not like inflation. We always talk about how a dinner at a good restaurant used to cost maybe 300 rupees earlier, but it's now more than even 1000 rupees. So no, we don't like inflation. We don't like the price of petrol going up. We don't like to pay more for any goods and service. The usual thing that the central bank, that is the Reserve Bank of India, does in situations like this is they have a huge US dollar reserve with them that is nearly $600 billion right now. So they keep on selling the US dollars in the international markets or in our exchanges, and this causes a pressure on the US currency, and in fact it rises up the Indian currency as well. So we are not sure exactly why the RBI is not going to this route, aggressively selling their foreign reserves even when it is much higher than it has ever been in history. So maybe it is because of the simultaneous increase in the prices of crude oil in the international markets, and the government is trying to control inflation in other ways. They have cut the excise duty on petrol recently, and they're trying to bring down bond yields as well to control inflation. Hoping that we have shined some light into the history of the US dollar, the petrol dollar, and how it became the dominant currency in the world. Now you know how the rupee's value changes compared to the dollar and what are the advantages, secret advantages, and even the disadvantages linked to it. So until another video, this is Ajay signing off. See you. Bye-bye.